Life has a way of surprising us. Even after years of what seems like a steady, predictable journey. In today's story, a woman discovers a hidden truth that shakes the foundation of her marriage and forces her to confront the secrets her husband has kept for decades. The story unfolds as she navigates the pain of betrayal, the process of self-discovery, and ultimately, the strength to start anew. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story with Life Stories. Stay tuned for more real-life experiences and profound lessons. It was a quiet Friday afternoon, and the house was filled with a kind of peaceful stillness that only settles when the day is winding down. My son, Thomas, and his family were getting ready for a weekend road trip. And as they were about to leave, my grandson, Neil, clung to me with a pout. His little face twisted with that familiar pleading expression he often wore when he wanted something. And I couldn't help but smile. "Please, Grandma, take good care of my cat," he begged, his small hands gripping my arm. I chuckled and reassured him. "Go have fun, sweetie. I'll take care of everything here. I promise." The cat was easy to manage. Feeding and cleaning out the litter box had become part of my routine. But what lingered with me was his gaze, filled with that earnest trust only a child can give. As they drove away, I returned to the house, the silence now more pronounced. After refilling the cat's food and wiping down the counters, a gust of wind sent a thin layer of dust swirling in the kitchen. I picked up a cloth and began cleaning, my mind drifting. That's when I noticed it, the photo album on the coffee table in the living room. It was old, the leather worn and edges frayed, and it seemed so out of place amidst the modern furniture. I flipped it open, expecting to find pictures of Neil or perhaps our family gatherings over the years. But what I found took me by surprise. It wasn't Neil's photo collection at all. This album didn't feel like a family keepsake. No, it felt like something more personal, something private. The photos were of two people, two figures who seemed to share an unspoken connection. The backgrounds in each photo varied widely: snow-capped mountains, vast grassy plains, endless deserts, and tropical beaches. Yet, through all the change in scenery, the two people in the pictures remained constant. A man and a woman, their silver hair glinting in the light, stood together in every frame. There they were, side by side, smiling broadly, each photo exuding an aura of joy and youth, though their faces were clearly weathered by time. I flipped through the pages with trembling fingers. The man in the pictures was unmistakable. It was David, my husband of almost 40 years. But the woman beside him, my heart skipped a beat as the realization hit me. Her name was Sarah, his first love, the one he had often mentioned but never with much detail. He had always talked about her with a kind of nostalgic wistfulness. But I never thought much of it, until now. The most recent photo was taken before a majestic waterfall, their hands entwined, the mist swirling around them. They wore matching blue outfits, David in a shirt and Sarah in a flowing dress. The rugged cliffs behind them made them appear almost ethereal, as though untouched by time. And yet, there they were, with smiles that suggested no burden, no weight of the years they had lived through. The back of the photo read, "David and Sarah. September 2023. It was written in David's familiar script. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. September 2023. That wasn't long ago. I had ironed that very shirt for him, carefully pressing it just the way he liked it before he left for a seminar out of town. He had never mentioned anything about traveling with Sarah. My thoughts began to race, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. How had I not known about this? Was it all just a fantasy? A long-held secret kept from me? I turned the pages more quickly now, each photo an unsettling revelation. One after another, they chronicled their travels over the years, year after year. Destinations ranging from the mountains of Switzerland to the golden beaches of the Caribbean. The dates on the back of the photos were written in David's hand, sometimes a simple note, other times lines of poetry, small musings that he had written for her. I froze at one particular photo, yellowed with age. It was taken in 2005, in front of a snow-capped mountain. They were so young then. Their eyes full of hope and promise. On the back, David had written, "If one day we stand in the snow together, then in this life, we have already grown old side by side." The words hit me hard. The weight of them pressed down on my chest, suffocating me. They had been planning this life together, for so long. Even when they were apart, they had always known they would come back to each other. The anger surged in my chest. 40 years of marriage, and I had never known about this. David, my husband, the man I had shared my life with, the one who had always seemed so consumed by his work and his responsibilities. He had been spending an entire month every year with Sarah. His first love, from the time we were both in our 40s. For 25 years, I had been blind to it all. How could I have been so foolish? I wanted to call him right then. To demand answers. To make him explain everything. But as I reached for my phone, my strength failed me. My fingers grew cold. My mind fogged. I couldn't bring myself to confront him just yet. Instead, I stood there, in the dimming light of the living room, clutching the photo album tightly to my chest. A whirlwind of emotions crashing through me, betrayal, confusion, and a deep, profound sadness. I realized then that the life I thought I knew, the marriage I had invested in, had been built on lies. I slipped the album into my bag, my hands shaking, and walked out the door. The world outside had already begun to darken, and with each step I took, I felt as though I was walking into an unknown future, one where the man I had loved for so long was now a stranger to me. I walked slowly, almost mechanically, as my mind churned. The evening sky was painted in shades of violet and orange, yet I saw nothing of its beauty. My thoughts were consumed by the discovery I had made. The photos, the handwritten notes, the realization that for years, I had been living a lie. I was no longer sure of anything. My entire life with David suddenly felt like a carefully constructed illusion. By the time I reached home, the sun had fully dipped below the horizon, and darkness had blanketed everything. David was sitting at his desk in the study, his eyes fixed on his computer screen. As always, focused, engrossed in his work. The sound of his typing was oddly soothing, yet it felt like an intrusion to my mind, which was so sharply aware of the growing rift between us. He glanced up when I entered, his face betraying nothing. "What took you so long?" he asked, his voice casual, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "What's for dinner?" "I'm starving." The words were familiar, like a routine we had followed for decades. But they stung. The warmth that had once been in his voice now felt distant, hollow. I looked at the empty dining table, the lifeless kitchen, and suddenly the absurdity of it all overwhelmed me. It wasn't about the dinner, it wasn't about anything trivial. It was about the years of betrayal, the years of trust I had placed in him, and the unspoken truth that had always lurked in the shadows. "If I don't cook, will you never think to do it yourself?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of frustration and sorrow. I wasn't sure if I even wanted him to answer. David looked at me, surprised. "Bad mood?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Did our son upset you again? You know he's always been a little too much sometimes." I felt a surge of bitterness, the anger that had been simmering inside me breaking free. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. I didn't care if he was surprised or confused. What mattered was the truth. The truth I had just uncovered. The truth I could no longer ignore. "Actually, I have to leave town again next week," David continued, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "You'll have to hold down the fort here. Don't worry about cooking tonight. Let's just go out." I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to say. I had to say it. "Can you not go?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. David paused, his hands frozen in mid-motion. He turned to look at me, a puzzled expression crossing his face. What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. "I mean, don't go. Not just this time. From now on, no more trips." David stared at me, clearly baffled. "What are you talking about? This is my job, Julia." Professors at my level are expected to travel for lectures. I looked at him, my gaze steady, though my heart felt as if it were breaking. You're 65, David, I said, almost whispering. You're 65, and are you really just going to keep traveling? Just for lectures? His eyes narrowed, confusion turning to defensiveness. What are you trying to say? His voice held a hint of disbelief. Are you accusing me of something? You know my work trips are public knowledge. I've told you about them. And there it was, the defense. The excuses. For years, he had relied on his work as a shield. As a way to keep me from asking questions. From seeing the truth. I had always believed him. His work was exhausting, and I had always assumed he needed the escape. The travel. After all, what else could he be doing while he was gone for a month every year? I had been so naive. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. The man I had spent most of my life with. The one who had never once shown any sign of betrayal. I had thought we shared something simple. Something steady. A partnership. But now, as I stood there, confronting him with the truth, I realized how wrong I had been. I've seen it all, David, I said, my voice sharp. I've seen the photos. I've read the notes. For 25 years, you've been living a life I didn't know about. You and Sarah, you've been traveling the world together. All while I was here, taking care of everything else. David's face shifted, and for the first time, I saw something other than calm composure. His hand clenched around his pen. Julia, after all these years, you're going through my things? His voice rose sharply, filled with indignation. You're accusing me of something? Do you really think I'd do that to you? To us? I felt a wave of anger rise inside me. But at the same time, something else was settling in, disappointment. The man I had spent decades with was now a stranger to me. Don't you dare try to deny it, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. You've been lying to me, David, and now you're acting like I'm the one in the wrong for finding out the truth? He snatched the album from my hands. His face flushed with anger. Julia, you've changed, he spat. This is what you've become. You don't trust me anymore? I took a deep breath. The storm inside me was rising. But I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I simply turned and walked out of the room. Heading for the door, I had reached my breaking point. I had to leave. I had to get away from him. And so, I walked. The weight of the years. The betrayal. The lies. All pressing down on me. The silence between us had never been so loud. The days after the confrontation felt like a blur. I moved out of the house that had been my home for over 40 years. The place where I had raised our son, Thomas, and built a life with David. It felt strange, almost surreal, to leave behind everything I had once considered permanent. The house was empty, save for a few belongings I had taken with me. I left behind the furniture, the family photos on the walls, and the memories that had once been so dear to me. I settled into a small apartment I had owned for years but had never lived in. It was modest but comfortable, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of freedom. No more pretending, no more maintaining the facade of a happy marriage. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Thomas, of course, was furious. He couldn't understand why I had chosen to divorce David, especially after all the years they had spent together as a family. To him, David was a dedicated father and husband, a man who had always provided for us. In his eyes, the discovery of David's affair was something minor, something that didn't warrant breaking up our family. He called me impulsive, selfish, and irresponsible. Mom, you're throwing away everything, Thomas shouted at me, his voice seething with frustration. Dad has done so much for this family. He's worked his entire life to make sure we're okay. And now you're just throwing it all away. You don't understand what you're doing. I stayed silent. What could I say? How could I explain to him that all these years of being the dutiful wife, the one who supported David and held the family together, had left me feeling like I didn't exist at all? How could I tell him that the man I had loved for decades had been living a double life? That my love for him had been built on lies? But even as Thomas ranted and railed at me, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of peace. It was the peace of knowing I had made the right decision for myself. The peace of finally walking away from a life that had long since ceased to be mine. I started doing things for myself. I enrolled in piano lessons. Something I had always wanted to do but had never found the time for. It was difficult at first. My fingers clumsy on the keys. But the music soon became a refuge. I threw myself into it with the same dedication I had given to every other part of my life. And for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. I also began to travel. Something I had never had the chance to do while I was married. It was liberating, stepping onto a plane, not knowing what I would find or where I would go. Just knowing that I was free to do whatever I wanted. My first trip was to Hawaii. I spent a month there, letting the waves and the warm air cleanse me of the anger and sorrow I had carried for so long. When I returned from Hawaii, I posted pictures of my travels online. To my surprise, they garnered a great deal of attention, and my followers on social media grew rapidly. The comments were filled with admiration and encouragement, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was being seen for who I really was. David, of course, was still in the picture. Despite everything, he would occasionally send me messages, asking where certain things were in the house or sharing photos of his attempts at cooking. But I ignored him. I didn't need his approval or his attention anymore. I was finally starting to live for myself. Then one day, I received an unexpected visitor, Sarah. She showed up at my door with a soft smile on her lips. Her hands gracefully holding a cup of coffee. She seemed composed, elegant, as always. The woman who had always been a shadow in my life, the one who had taken so much from me, was now sitting in front of me, calm and unbothered. "I'm truly sorry for the pain I've caused you," Sarah said, her voice soft. "David and I never meant for it to turn out like this." I looked at her, the woman who had been my husband's first love, the one who had shared a life with him behind my back for years, the one who had walked into my home and taken pieces of my life without ever asking. But instead of feeling anger, I felt pity. She had spent her entire life waiting for David, and in the end, what did she have? A man who had never been able to choose between her and his family. A man who had led us both on for decades, promising love but giving nothing in return. "I don't know why you came here," I said, my voice steady, "but you can have him. Sarah, he's yours. He always has been." Her eyes flashed for a moment, and then she let out a soft sigh, almost as if she had been relieved by my words. "I know," she said quietly, "I know, but I'm not the one who's lost everything. I lost my love years ago. Julia, you lost your life." And just like that, I realized how true her words were. I had spent years clinging to a marriage that had never really been mine, while Sarah had spent her life clinging to a love that could never be. Both of us had lost something, but only one of us was brave enough to walk away. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid. As the months passed, I slowly but surely began to rebuild my life. The echoes of the past, the betrayal, and the heartache started to fade, replaced by a sense of liberation I had never known before. I traveled more, explored new places, met new people, and most importantly, I learned to enjoy the simple pleasures that life had to offer. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. David's life, on the other hand, was anything but peaceful. The scandal surrounding his affair with Sarah exploded on social media, with the public finally learning the truth behind their so-called true love. What had once been a romanticized story became a cautionary tale about betrayal and deceit. People who had once admired David now questioned his integrity, and the once perfect image of him and Sarah crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. I, however, remained focused on my own journey. I continued my piano lessons, now playing with confidence and passion, and even posted videos of my progress online. To my surprise, they went viral, and I was flooded with support and admiration. It was as though the world had finally noticed me, not as someone's wife or mother, but as me, a woman with her own identity, her own dreams. One day, as I sat at a cafe in Paris, a message from Thomas popped up on my phone. It was a video of David, sitting in a hospital bed, his frail form a far cry from the strong man I had once known. He was struggling with his memory, and I could see the tears in his eyes as he watched one of my piano videos. It felt surreal, watching him in this state. I felt no sorrow, no anger, just a deep sense of finality. I had let go of the past, and in doing so, I had found my peace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories. Stay tuned for the next chapter of real-life experiences.